with today's webinar. We're going to talk about Blumira and automating threat detection and response. During this webinar, a few things we're going to cover: how SIEM and threat detection works today, and discuss some of the challenges there. And then how to use and leverage Blumira's platform to learn more about attacks on your infrastructure and environment, examples of threat detections and what they mean, how to respond using Blumira's pre-built playbooks, how to easily set up an integration with Blumira, and how to configure automated threat response via our block list functionality. So, you know, in starting and talking about how threat detection and response works today, there's a lot of pieces and parts that have to be put in place, tweaked, and tuned properly and integrated together in order to have an effective security operations function. And so if you look across the different spectrum of someone's environments, it's going to be their existing security products, collecting logs, alerts, correlating threat intelligence, ingesting that information, applying rules, and then getting alerts to determine what to actually do and making choices on what to do. And you know, some of the challenges is, in order to be able to get this right, a lot of organizations struggle with the fact that they don't have the security expertise to stitch these tools together and decide what outcomes need to be made. There's a lack of actual insight, so there's a lot of alerts and information, but not much across the tool sets that actually tells you what to do. And then an increase in targeted attacks, especially when we're talking about SMB mid-market customers, where everyone essentially has been a target nowadays for a multitude of reasons, right? Things like ransomware. The challenge with doing security operations is it's pretty complicated to automate. And if you look at it, there's a lot of things that actually need to be done to do this effectively. So you have log and alert ingestion and parsing. You have the correlation of third-party threat intelligence, or building your own threat intelligence even. You have to build detection rules and alerting. And then you have to actually validate, hey, are these real threats, and prioritize them and figure out what to do with them, whether it's investigate, respond. And then on top of that, right, you have to report to understand what you're doing from a security perspective. And then there's also a lot of reasons why you would do these things around compliance, right? So traditionally, organizations would put a SIEM in place. I think debatably, a lot of organizations struggle in getting a SIEM operational because of the complexity of the tool sets, and more focused on collection than actually security. And then, you know, in order to start looking at automation, people layer on what would traditionally be called SOAR, which is going to be your security operations automation and response. And this is pretty complicated as far as getting it right and getting it done effectively. And it typically takes a team of people in order to do a deployment and implementation that's successful. And so that's a pretty big challenge, especially when you're talking about scaling this down to an organization of any size. And so I look at the market of security operations in the SIEM as one similar to a Choose Your Own Adventure book. If you've ever read a Choose Your Own Adventure book, the interesting thing statistically, the outcome of being successful, or the outcome of an unfavorable outcome, is about 75% of the time the book is going to result in something unfavorable. And if you look at this, it's kind of interesting. 451 research, when they looked at SIEM deployments and security operations, 44% mentioned a lack of expertise, and 28% mentioned inadequate staffing in regards to deployment of SIEM. So I'm going to write a book called The Guide to Deploying SIEM, because that is kind of the reality. Is it's very tough for organizations to deploy a SIEM, deploy the right operations and controls in place to actually get value out of it, other than maybe collecting some logs and running some reports, right? So I'm going to talk a little bit about how threat detection should actually work, and then we'll hop to the Blumira product to walk through how we help customers with that. So first off, threat detection should be relatively end-to-end. What this means is that when a product is working within your environment, it should integrate across the stack of the products that you leverage and use. And the goal is to automate as much of that as possible. So when you tie in, for example, an integration with a third-party product, the things where automation should be focused around is log ingestion, log parsing, threat intelligence, correlation of threat intelligence, having the right detection rules, alerting, prioritization, and reporting, and being able to do lateral movement detection. Once you actually do that, right, then you surface the right threats without all the noise, right? And then what can be asked is, can it be automated from a response perspective or a validation and investigation perspective? And so the reality is the value from an automation perspective is actually on the front end. And I think that's a reality that a lot of the existing tools in the market are missing, is the fact that really automation is focused on the back end and layering on the SOAR type tools in addition to a product like SIM. So once we make this determination, if we can automate and take action, great, let's do it with the existing security product stack. If not, having actionable way to walk through response is crucial, and someone should be able to respond and do that in a help desk type role. So it has to be simple and easy and intuitive on what actually needs to be done. And that essentially enables an IT team then to be able to respond from a security perspective as well, not just someone with security expertise. Now, this is our approach from Blumira perspective as far as how we're addressing and supporting and helping our customers. And I'll walk through a bit further as far as where we're tying in from a product perspective and how this works. Additionally, with Blumira, what I would mention is we are backed with a security analyst team. So any part of the process along this way, there's someone to interact with and help and support and guide you through the process when and if things do come up. So you do have access to the security expertise. Now, from a Blumira perspective, how our product is working here is, first, your security tools are going to integrate with a Blumira sensor. And then the sensor is going to send information to our cloud service, right? So we're hosted in GCP and we're built from the ground up. That's then going to correlate automatically when this integration is set up, threat intelligence, rules, threat hunting, and that's going to then surface alerts to a customer when there's threats and provide them with a way to respond. Or in some cases, we might have automated actions where we actually trigger a response directly with the tool itself without requiring necessarily human interaction. Now, from a integration perspective, right, we integrate with some of the key areas across the customer's environment to get the right information so we can effectively detect the right threats. And these are places like your firewall, your endpoint security tools, your identity stack, your productivity tools, things like Office 365 and G Suite, right? Email is a really common area to target, Cisco umbrella. And then other areas too, like your endpoints, for example, with Windows or Linux, and things like gateways, right, with F5. So lastly, before I hop to demo, what I would say is on the compliance side, we also help you meet and exceed compliance requirements. And so this can be anything from PCI to NIST and CMMC, as we're talking about federal regulations. On the finance side, FFIEC, and then HIPAA, as we're talking about the healthcare side for environment. So it's nice that we're able to address not only the security measures that are needed, but also the compliance measures needed for customers. So with that, I'm going to hop to demo. So we can walk through the product of Blumira and how it actually works. And feel free, if anyone has any questions as we go through, don't hesitate to ask in regards to the product and how it works. Happy to show any of that. So the first thing I'm going to do is hop through the setup process with Blumira and what that looks like from a customer perspective. I mentioned earlier that we have a sensor that goes within the customer's environment. And this is going to live on a typically an Ubuntu server. And this essentially is going to be the place where we integrate with third-party products. And so it's going to be able to ingest things like syslog. It's also going to be able to connect via API, and it can work as a honeypot as well to detect lateral movement within a customer's environment, right? And so here I can quickly show you, something like Cisco Umbrella. We put in some API keys, and you're good to go. CrowdStrike would be a similar example. We could see Duo from a two-factor authentication perspective. G Suite, Office 365, on and on. I'm gonna show really quickly, like honeypot module, for example, is one that I click install. It's now up and running on the sensor itself, and it's operational. So very quick, easy, and intuitive. Immediately when you have that integration set up and running, we're ingesting logs, we're parsing, you can get reporting on those logs as well, which is really, really nice. Now, hopping to the responder dashboard itself, what I'm going to do is walk through some common different examples as far as some of the threats that get surfaced within a customer's environment, or some of the suspected threats, right? So first off, just starting with something pretty common, which is a suspected threat. And in this example here, we can see this is a new domain administrator account created. And so, as an IT administrator or a security folk, you definitely want to make sure that when got access is being provisioned to your account, you validate whether this should actually be happening, right? So we can see the matched evidence down below here. Here's the account. Is this actually meant to happen? And it's a suspect, not a threat, because we haven't validated yet. So in this case, I'll mark that the source user states they're unaware as to how the account was created. And I'm going to close the finding. And what that's going to do is that's going to convert this over to a threat. And if I look here from a notifications perspective, we can configure phone number, email, text services as far as how you want to be notified when there's different forms of threats or suspects or risks within your environment. And if I go back, essentially that suspect, right, since I clicked on it, is now going to turn into a threat. So we're going to see that here. And what you're going to see is it's now turned into rogue domain administrator account, right? And so someone that actually is responding from a suspect and validation perspective might be different than the role of the person that's actually taking action, for instance, in IT. And so I'm gonna grab this, and it's gonna show, hey, this is a real threat now, unauthorized access attempt. Here's the PowerShell script specifically to run to remediate this threat and shut off access of that account. And then I could validate that we've completed that action and close the finding itself. And I also can write messages to save for ourselves or interact with the security analysts on the Blumira side if there's questions specifically about this threat. Now, showing a few different examples, I can hop into a few more, and keep in mind, this is some demo data. So normally a customer might have a threat or two in here surfaced when they come into the dashboard. But some of the other common examples are going to be things like reconnaissance scanning or password spraying. And so this could be detected on, for instance, a next-gen firewall. And we can see here, we've identified that there's essentially anomalous traffic coming from these IP addresses, and they've been determined to be on a threat feed that shows that they're bad. And then there's matched evidence, which is stacked. So we're not sending you alert for every single one of these that comes in. And what we can do with this workflow is make a decision. Do I want to block the IP addresses, or do I want to take another form of an action and put them in myself, or do nothing? In this case, I'm going to immediately block the source IP addresses, and I'll resolve the finding. And what this is going to do is automatically put the IP addresses on a block list. And this block list works via the dynamic block list capabilities on your next gen firewall. So you can see the IP address in here, and this is going to integrate with your Cisco ASA, your Firepower, your Palo Alto, FortiGate, Fortinet products or checkpoint, and essentially do the blocking for you. Now I can take it a step further and actually click this button and automate that process. So when a new firewall or when a new threat's detected, it would automatically block that. And then the benefit from a Blumira perspective, cloud platform, is we can leverage community information as well to surface threats. So if we detect certain threats from one customer, we can then apply that to another customer as well. So really easy and effective from an automation perspective of what you can do. So I'm going to hop in and go back to the responder view to show a few other examples of maybe some suspected threats or risks within a customer's environment, and show some other examples beyond what I initially showed so far. So you know, some things I think particularly interesting. I might be biased because that came from Duo, but detecting, for instance, that Duo access is denied means that the primary credential is likely compromised. And so in this instance, what we can do is we can reestablish that level of trust by doing a reset of credentials in the primary authentication, which would be Active Directory, to reestablish the full two-factor authentication, right? So really easy and intuitive as far as the action that needs to get done by the actual responder themselves. And then some other common things as we look at recent attacks with like SM Bleed, that maybe you wouldn't think of necessarily as something to be monitoring for, but a good example is we would be monitoring for public IP connectivity to an internal network via RDP or SMB. And those should, number one, never be exposed. But the reality is misconfigurations are the most common way that people get compromised. And so in this instance, we're detecting that someone is actually gaining access from externally somehow. And that shouldn't even be open, right? And so we're providing the remediation steps as far as what someone should do, which is put it behind a VPN or a firewall. So really easy and intuitive risks surfaced. Another example here is data exfiltration. So detecting, hey, there's a gig outbound connection via HTTPS is a good and effective way. And you probably hear my kids in the background. Welcome to work from home. But really effectively being able to surface you know, real risks or threats within an environment so then you can go and investigate. Now, beyond that, we do provide dashboard capabilities for the manager or security teams. So you can take a look at threats detected over time from a trending perspective. And we can look at suspected threats as well as where we're seeing the threats come from a location perspective. So a lot of good information and deep dive that can be provided quite easily and intuitively from a customer perspective. So keep in mind, if you do have any questions, I'm going to look real quick to see if there's any questions so far. And I can hop to any additional you know, workflows or areas people might be interested in from a product perspective. What I would say is in working with a lot of different customers and prospects as far as evaluating the product and onboarding, the joy is, you know, likely in a couple hours worth of time in setting up the sensor and getting integrated with Blumira, you're able to operationalize and get value out of it nearly immediately. And that's one of the big differences when we go back to the discussion around traditional products and the complexity of them. And so the idea really is to make it easy and intuitive for anyone to get up and running, and also do it at an affordable cost. I do have a few questions here. It looks like that I can help provide some examples of. Someone was asking, do we integrate with VPNs? And I think that's a great question. I can show some different examples here where we're actually surfacing threats. And probably most common one I would say is Cisco AnyConnect anomalous access attempt. Here's an example where we're actually detecting that there's some form of password spraying going on. And similar to what I showed you before, we can block the source IP addresses of that attack to remediate. And as I mentioned before, the stacking evidence, right? So we're giving the information and providing it in a way that's in a single ticket, single view, in order to be able to respond. It looks like there's another question. Let me read it real quick and then provide an answer to it. It looks like the question is regarding the ability to, or what threat intelligence are we using or correlating? So yeah, as a service, right, we're using somewhere between 13 and 15 different providers of threat intelligence and our own threat intelligence as well to be able to correlate and understand if something's a threat or a risk to a customer. So that's a big part of the service as far as helping do that for the customer on their behalf and providing them with the responses and playbooks on what to actually do. So cool. Well, it sounds like that's the questions for today. What I would say is in regards to interest from a product perspective, you know, if anybody wants to engage with us, you can email sales@blumira.com. There's also a lot of information regarding our product itself on our website, blumira.com, and happy to engage with anybody that's interested. The last thing I would say, and I think this is a little bit old, sorry, but we do have a webinar in 2 weeks on Windows logging, which is really helping our customers understand the importance and value of Windows logs. That's on actually June 16th at 1 p.m. So a little bit different than the slide here, but we would love to have you join there as well. If you have any interest in learning about Windows logging itself, and diving a little bit deeper as far as what we've learned in interacting with Windows environments and our experts, Amanda Berlin and Mike Behrman. So join us for that. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you have any additional questions, don't hesitate to reach out on the website or email sales@blumira.com. Take care.